Divers encounter an ancient shipwreck laden with treasure. The treasure is Chinese, but the ship looks Arab. The find gives archaeologist Tom Vosmer the chance to resurrect a boat not seen for 1,200 years.
We're creating this creature there that's going to, sail to Singapore.
Vosmer's quest leads deep into deserts and rainforests. On a mission to explore an ancient technology.
These things are at least 1,000 years old.
But as the launch approaches, a last-minute hitch
still is scary. Scary to death.
Pushes Vosmer's team to the limits of endurance and brings the ship to the brink of disaster. Oman, a fast-developing state on the southeastern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. At first glance, Oman seems a place more used to looking forward than back, but not entirely. On a beach just south of Muscat, the capital, an archaeological team is putting the finishing touches to an ocean-going Arab ship. Based on a 1,200-year-old design, it's 18 meters long, 6.5 meters across, and weighs in at more than 18 tons. Amazingly, not one nail, screw, or bolt has been used in its construction. Instead, the boat is held together entirely by rope. Leading the project is maritime archaeologist Tom Vosmer.
This is an archaeological experiment. It is unique, and it's certainly worth having a go at to try to recreate something like this and see what we can learn from it.
Vosmer has 30 years historic boat-building experience under his belt, much of it in the Middle East. But this time, he and his team are in uncharted waters. The inspiration for the project dates back to 1998. In the Java Sea, south of Singapore, divers made an incredible discovery. A shipwreck laden with treasure. 60,000 pieces of porcelain, silver, and gold. The treasure was around 1,200 years old. It turned out to be Chinese. But the origin of the ship remained a mystery. Then, divers found a clue. Evidence that the wreck's hull timbers were not nailed together, but sewn.
It's assembled using cordage, about 3 millimeters in diameter, and passed several times through holes and matching holes along the plank seams.
Vosmer recognized signs that linked the wreck to the Middle East.
There were some features that were so close to what was being used here only, say, 20 years ago, that it was remarkable.
The wreck gave archaeologists a unique glimpse of how the Arab sailors of legend might have designed and built ocean-going boats.
These Arab navigators were really the pioneers in establishing what was then the longest sea trading route in the world.
The wreck gave birth to a bold plan: to reconstruct the boat using original methods and materials, then to follow the ancient trade routes 5,500 kilometers across the Indian Ocean to Singapore. Named Jewel of Muscat, the project is part of an Omani government initiative to help reconnect the country with its maritime heritage. Rewind 12 months to the start of construction. The workforce assembles. Archaeologists, shipwrights and laborers drawn from 5 countries.
I'm their boss, so they have to do what I say. It's a sort of carrot and stick, I guess.
In recording how we are actually building the vessel now, ideally this will give us also some insights into how the boat was built in the past.
This boat is very demanding. It's not like boats where the planks are nailed and the work is finished quickly. This type of sewn boat is very hard to build.
A group of local apprentice carpenters completes the list.
Our grandfathers and fathers used to work on boats like this. We're naturally very proud of our Omani heritage. Now a new generation is learning about it.
For the project to work, this somewhat motley crew has to forge itself into a team. Compared to standard Western practice, sewn boats are built in reverse order. The hull is assembled first, and only afterwards are the internal frames and beams added. Nevertheless, the team's first challenge is a conventional one: to lay out the keel, the load-bearing spine of the ship. Ideally fashioned from a single timber, in this case the ship's length requires a two-piece keel. Connecting these relies on a special joint called a scarf.
This is a model of the scarf joint that Bubble made. There are many variations on them. And these fit together so this cannot move laterally. With this key placed through there and driven in and then cut off, it can't move in any direction. You can find this joint, I think, probably in any boat building society in the world, or some close variation of it.
A model is one thing, but these timbers weigh more than half a ton. The joint has to fit millimeter perfect, and it's all got to be done by hand.
We are not using modern tools, so we can have a perfect, smooth surface. We are using hand tools, a sort of a traditional way to build boats since, I don't know, ancient time. I guess they used the same way even 1,000 years ago.
It's the fledgling team's first major test. Eventually, the linchpin is driven home. The joint locks into place.
Fit the first time. No stuffing around with adjustments or anything. It's just spot on.
It's a defining moment for the boat and the boat builders.
Cutting the joint to fit was my proudest moment on the project so far. It was then that I thought, we've got a boat.
The wood they're using is not easy to work with. In fact, it's one of the toughest on the planet. Laboratory analysis indicated the wreck's hull was built using a hardwood called Afzelia africana. Today, there are only a few places where Afzelia is available for timber, and the ship needs 38 tons of it. The hunt for a supply of Afzelia takes Vosma over 6,000 kilometers from Oman, deep into the rainforests of Ghana, West Africa. The journey is difficult. It's wet. It's hot. Local wood merchant Eric Aguirre has taken on the challenge of delivering the timber. At first glance, Aguirre's milling site does not inspire confidence. The equipment is outmoded. Breakdowns are frequent. Tom can't afford a delay in shipping the timber back to Oman. but the conditions conspire against him.
But the problem we had as well, loading these ones, were the tractor kept sinking into the soil because they were a bit soft. Right.
Time is really critical here, and if we don't make this window of sailing, the whole project is in a mess.
All we need to do right now is just get the logs here.
Get the logs here and start the cutting.
Yeah,
but it's just critical we get it done. All right.
Aguirre's crew has never cut boat timber before.
Get around here.
Vosmer is looking for trees that lumberjacks would normally ignore.
Yeah, mark it. Yeah. How about these? Eric, you see this piece here? Just there, yes. That's a nice little shape. Look out for pieces like that. And this one here.
The Ghanaians quickly catch on. Curved and twisted branches suddenly yield potential frames and floor timbers.
Just there, that's fine. That's good. This isn't something you guys are used to cutting curvy bits, but that's what we need. That's a marvelously curved piece of timber. We can find a place for that somewhere in there.
With Tom, he can tell that this I can get frames out of it, I can get planks, I can get stem blocks out of it and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm actually learning from him. I've acquired a lot of knowledge.
The early hold-ups forgotten, the lumberjacks begin piling up the wood. It was no accident the ancients chose Afzelia to build stone boats.
In this ship, we have to sew it together, which means we have to make a number of holes in a row along each edge of the timber. There could be a tendency for the thing just to tear along the dotted line, for example. And this timber is very suitable for that because it has an interlocking grain. I don't know how well you can see this, but this kind of waviness, that tends to discourage that happening. Scrape a bit more away.
But Afzelia is a dense wood. The wavy grain that makes it so suitable for hull timber also makes it very hard to shape. Planks are generally straight. Boat hulls, however, have to curve. Back in Oman, the ancient ship reconstruction continues. The team is erecting the stem and stern posts. The boat is coming alive.
Whoa. It looks fairly chaotic.
The work gathers momentum.
Some of these guys, they just never stop. You know, you can't stop them working.
Night falls, no one thinks of leaving. The team's enthusiasm makes Tom Vosmer a little nervous.
I was really fearful of when this was happening, that someone could easily get hurt.
But he's coming to trust his multinational boat builders.
Everybody seems to be working in quite well. The Omanis are learning, and it's a good team that's shaping up. I'm really happy about it.
With keel, stem and stern post in place, they're ready to begin fitting the hull planks. No one knows how the ancients twisted hull planks into shape. So begins an archaeological experiment.
The first challenge in building this boat is to understand the timber we're building it from. None of us have ever used this timber, Afzelia africana. It's suitable for the ship, but none of us know how it will behave. We don't know how to handle it. We don't know how to twist it and bend it, or what techniques we'll need to develop to do that.
First, the team opts for soaking the planks in the sea. The theory is that once softened, the planks can be shaped on giant formers. But the soaking method soon hits a snag. Try as they might, the team cannot get the wood to respond.
These planks aren't quite the right shape yet. They're not quite twisted enough, which means we're going to have to try a different method, I think, to get them. These have to fit absolutely perfectly.
Time for Plan B. Each plank goes for an individual sauna.
We're hoping that by doing it this way with this steam box, we'll get the exact shape we need for the plank. So,
9:35.
9:35.
So hopefully around 11:35.
11:30, something like that.
The steam relaxes the fibers of the timber, which allows for easier shaping.
And they come out rather floppy, but a little bit organic, I guess you could say.
The window is tight. Just 2 minutes. Take too long and the whole plank is useless. Slowly, the rows of planks grow. For the hull to remain watertight, each plank has to fit flush with its neighbour. To ensure a tight fit, the craftsman turned to a traditional tool called a callum.
It means pencil in Arabic, and it's basically sort of a two-ended pencil that draws a parallel line on the upper plank that basically mirrors the edge of the lower plank.
The shipwrights remove the new plank and chisel to the callum's line.
Then afterwards they basically put it back on, and usually do it actually sometimes 2 to 3 times just to make sure that they have it exactly right.
I am continually amazed at how good these guys are. They can make the side of that plank, for example, look like it was put plain smooth with a machine, and they're doing it all with chisels.
With the hull taking shape, the team must solve an ageless puzzle. How to sew the boat together.
The ropes. I mean, when you see this ship, you've got to wonder. It doesn't have any nails. How is it built without nails? If you could see this ship, you'd be astonished. How can it be?
In search of an almost forgotten technique, Vosmer has to journey over 800 kilometers through Oman's scorching desert to Al-Balid. Today, a spectacular archaeological site. In the 9th century, Al-Balid was a wealthy port, home to around 20,000 people. Embedded in the walls of houses and mosques, Vosmer makes an exciting find.
As you walk around this site, you see wooden pieces embedded in the walls everywhere. This is a really fascinating one because this is a channel that goes into this wall about 3.5 meters. These timbers that line this channel are ship's timbers. And we know they're ship's timbers because we can see the stitching lines, the stitching holes. Quite remarkable. And these things are at least 1,000 years old.
In the local museum, more timbers, their stitching still intact, a telltale X pattern still visible.
That was one of the things that made us realize that the shipwreck was in fact built in the Western Indian Ocean, because this kind of assembly is unique to this part of the world.
The stitching is made from coconut fiber. It's called koya. To find out how the ancients might have made this rope, Eric Staples journeys nearly 4,000 kilometers south to a small island off the coast of Tanzania. The monsoon winds have brought Arab traders to the Zanzibar group of islands for centuries. Back in 1840, the Sultan of Oman even based his entire court here. The Arabs brought Islam to the local people and passed on their know-how, particularly techniques in building and repairing sewn boats. Mjini Ole, a village on Pemba Island near Zanzibar, sits astride a tidal flat. Beneath the surface lies the secret to koya making. Hundreds of husks lie buried here for up to a year in a kind of giant coconut marinade. The soaking helps separate the fibers. When beaten, the husks soon produce great wads of koya. As Eric looks on, the women tease and roll the fibre into short tufts. Great lengths of two-ply twine begin to emerge from their rapidly moving fingers. In the end, the vessel consumes around 130,000 meters of koya from a variety of suppliers, both hand and machine-made. Enough to encircle the island of Manhattan more than twice over. Back at the construction site, Eric's colleague Alessandro Guidoni carefully records a stitch history.
We call it stitching history because it's just, a history step by step of a plank stitching. I think it's the main part of the boat because it's what is really characterized the boat from other kind of boats.
Their drawings chart an intricate and painstaking process.
Every single stitch is recorded. Who is stitching it, when they started it, what hole they stitched to, how long it takes.
The figures are mind-boggling. More than 37,700 holes, over 127,000 stitches, all done by hand.
This is a form of boat building that is basically dying out as we speak. So this is not only an archaeological reconstruction process, but also an ethnographic project. We're actually recording these experts, master craftsmen of rope workers, who are eventually going to be out of business. So I think that's of equal value as well.
The art of the specialist rope workers is judging the right tension. If the stitches are too tight, they could break when they swell up in the water. Too loose, and the ship could leak and sink. Recreating a 1,200-year-old boat based on a wreck involves a degree of guesswork. With only 20% of the wreck actually preserved, Vosma's design team had to fill in the blanks themselves.
Certain things we know absolutely certain from that. Other things we think we're interpreting correctly, but they may or may not be interpreted correctly. And some things we don't know at all.
The fear is they may be copying a boat with an inherent weakness.
Why did it originally sink? We don't know. So we're always thinking, maybe because of the way it was built that we see in the archaeological evidence, maybe that was what led to the destruction of the ship.
Mindful of this risk, Vosma tests a model of the hull in a 60-metre tank at the University of Southampton, England.
It's a thrill to see this thing going through the water, and then you can sort of extrapolate that, and you think, now I can feel what it's going to be like with the real thing.
Woolen tufts fixed to the hull indicate the direction of water flow. Ideally, the tufts should all be aligned. But clearly, in this case, something's wrong.
You have this turbulence, it creates drag, and we need to think of a way to minimize that.
The drag could slow the full-size ship down. Tom suspects the shape of the stern.
It just doesn't look right, it doesn't feel right either. We might have to reconsider exactly, maybe make a slight alteration to how that, still staying within the archaeological evidence, because I think if we depart from that, we lose a lot of the purpose of this project in order to replicate that ship as best we can.
6 months into construction, the work is in full swing. Tom's hunt for curved trees in Ghana has paid off. The team now has to install frames to brace the hull. It's a step that's opposite to modern practice, where frames come first. Locking it all together, a reinforcing timber called a keelson.
Basically, the keelson is one of the largest pieces of the ship. Notched out on the sides, so it basically fits over the frames. And then that basically provides the sort of lock mechanism for the frames stay in place.
Luca is praying that the hoist will hold the 850-kilo weight of the keelson.
I'm really worried, and if it breaks and the keelson fails, it's gonna destroy the boat. And I'll be fired.
As it's lowered, final adjustments are made. The Afzelia weighs nearly a ton, yet it must fit millimetre perfect. With the keelson laid in and the planking mounting ever higher, the ship is nearing completion.
I mean, I'm quite overwhelmed by it. It's gorgeous, really. And personally, I think there's nothing quite as beautiful in the world made by man as a traditional ship. All the hand-done work, and you just come up with this gorgeous piece of sculpture, really.
The Omani apprentices find the boat inspiring.
The ship is big. It's beautiful. It's the first time we've had a ship built like this in Oman using the sewing method. We've learned so many things, but above all, it's beautiful.
The newly appointed captain for the voyage has never seen a hull like it.
In the beginning, when I saw a shape like this, it's just get my attention. It's completely different.
But boats are not built just to be admired. And no one knows how this boat is going to perform when and if it gets into the water. The Oman-based treasure ship reconstruction enters its final 48 hours. The aim, to launch 2 days hence on the morning tide. The plan, to push the cradle down a 100-meter trackway into the sea and let the rising tide water float it free. It's one of the few times the team has departed from traditional practice, and Tom Vosmer is by no means confident of the outcome.
Instead of the traditional sort of just push the thing down a grease skidway, instead of doing that, we've opted for this rather complex, rather modern sort of system where we actually make a big trolley and roll it down. Who knows? It may have been the wrong decision. I don't know. We'll see how well it works or doesn't work.
New faces have arrived on site to help. Naval architect Kim Clacker, an old friend of Tom's, has journeyed from Australia to offer advice.
The idea is that the vessel is supported entirely by the steel cradle, and we lower the steel cradle down onto the rails, and then the boat can be launched on the rails down into the water.
Specialist engineers from India direct the building of the cradle and track. But the long journey down the beach risks damage to the ship's precious hull.
Our main concern is the vulnerability of the stitching on the outside of the ship. Because if that gets chafed away or worn away by any amount at all, really, we could weaken the hull.
The construction site is hot and uncomfortable. A giant canopy offers shade from the sun, but little refuge from the stifling heat. Now the team has to endure a further burden, a fragrant odor. To help waterproof the hull, workers continually coat it in a glutinous mass of shark liver oil.
Well, we have actually historical accounts that mention it, but it's also something that's used, basically up to 20, 30 years ago for wooden boat building here in Oman. And there's still a couple of shark merchants that still sell it for wood fishing boats as well.
And I've seen the process, and the whole thing is full of maggots, and it's just dreadful. But it's great stuff. You just have to get past the smell.
With the launch window approaching, Vosmer sets a tough schedule.
We have to have everything ready to go as early as possible tomorrow, because I'd like to get the boat down the track during daylight tomorrow, and we don't know how long it will take. It might get jammed, it might run freely, we don't know.
The cradle weighs 7.5 tons. Around the hull, a set of hinged steel supports.
We need to get these arms in place so that the boat is steady and supported, it won't fall over.
The concern is how to protect the wooden stitched hull from all that heavy metal.
I mean, if this were a steel ship, no problem, or even fiberglass or something like that, no problem. But with this, it's a huge problem.
No one's sure of the best solution.
In this way, only this corner is gonna touch the boat.
First come wooden wedges. Then foam mattresses. Finally, a tarpaulin is tugged into position. And each time, 10 arms have to be lowered and raised again. The obsession with protecting the hull has blinded the team to its deadline. Eventually, the arms are rigged to everyone's satisfaction.
And now we need to move these tons of sand that's underneath, which we have to get out before we can lower it down onto the track. So that has to all happen before midnight.
As the cradle settles, down the beach at the water's edge, the workers are preparing to lay what should be the last few sections of track.
I'll just go and count how many.
Then Kim Clacker makes some calculations.
20 metres, you've got 7 in the water, you've got 13 left, so you've got 13, 20, you've got 11 metres to low water.
So there's 11 meters missing, basically. We need another section.
Yes.
Okay.
It looks like the trackway is going to come up short. The team is flummoxed. No one is sure if the track will reach deep water.
Okay, let's just solve this problem. We need 99 meters of track. Okay. So let's see how much we have. Let's see how many sleepers we have, and let's figure out what to do.
Yeah.
The workforce will have to scour the site for every available meter. "36 hours to launch. Under floodlights, the work continues. At midnight, the cradle is finally ready.
Push!
As winches play out cable, the boat begins to move. After nearly 2 years of planning and construction, triumph and adversity, the treasure ship is finally leaving its home. But the safety of deep water is 100 meters away. And right now, it might as well be 100 miles. 1 a.m., the team wrestles the final section of track into the surf. But the wind is getting up.
Fighting this sea is ridiculous and it's dangerous. People get thrown around. They could get their feet caught under some of these sleepers that are bouncing up and down. Or the steel, even worse.
It's now all hands to the pumps. Anyone with diving experience is sent into the water. Finally, the track is laid. By dawn, the boat is just meters from the water's edge. The launch window is tight. The boat will only float free on the spring or highest tides of the month. Just 2 tides in 2 days. And the first is on its way.
Just have to see how it goes in the next half hour or so, but in an hour and 15 minutes, we have to have that thing in the water. So it's getting fairly fraught, I guess you could say.
But then, the cradle grinds to a halt. The track has buckled under the weight of the hull.
And that wheel has sunk half its diameter nearly.
They need to find a solution fast.
The main concern now is the time.
Yeah.
We can't, you know...
Yeah, so we get the cradle to bypass this whole thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So is that a solution? Get a big vehicle to push it. Will that do the job? So if we've got a vehicle, then...
I have a bicycle.
Heavy duty?
Heavy duty bicycle. Mountain bike.
A bicycle won't do. They summon a backhoe.
What we're going to do, or try to do, is get this machine and a lot of people and just push it down maybe another 8 meters or so. Get us past this problem here.
The backhoe is a big mistake. Just meters from the water, the treasure ship gets a gentle nudge. Everyone is stunned. The hull has jumped forward in the cradle. If the impact has damaged the stitching, the launch is off.
I wonder if we need to cut this away and see if there's any damage. I mean, it'd be the pits, wouldn't it, to put it in the water and find we got a big crack through a plank or something.
Tom Vosmer checks the planking from the inside. While Luca fears what may lie behind the canvas.
They have no damage at all. Look. We got lucky because we didn't damage the stitching, yes. But still it's scary. Scary to death.
Well, I guess there is some advantage to a flexible sewn hull.
By now, the morning tide is swirling around the workers' feet. Tom takes the decision to push the launch back by 24 hours.
The tide is only 1 centimeter lower tomorrow morning, so, you know, it might do us good to get a day's rest and think about everything.
This means launching on the last high tide of the month. Miss this, and the entire project could grind to a halt. Workers spend the next few hours manhandling the boat into its final launch position. By late afternoon, all is ready. All they can do now is wait.
Okay, so we don't move anymore.
Don't move anymore.
Okay, Sheikh, Bukra, shukran.
It's 8 a.m., 0 hour. Local crowds gather, serenaded by a traditional band. For them, it's a spectacle. For Vosmer and his team, it's the most nerve-wracking moment of the last 2 years. Divers enter the water, ready to release the boat from the cradle.
We'll ease the thing down the track and see what we can do.
Push, 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 push!
A final heave, and the jewel of Muscat doesn't launch so much as lurch into the sea. Divers scramble to release the cradle support arms. $127,000 stitches stay fast. The hull remains watertight. Leakage is minimal. The Jewel is towed to a local marina for fitting out. For the Omanis involved, the connection with their ancient past is made.
To see this vessel built here in Oman, this is fantastic. I hope Omani public, Omani schools, Omani academy get a chance to see such incredible project.
As the ship is berthed, Vosma allows himself a brief moment of reflection.
And even though yes, there were a lot of uncertainties and a lot of debate about whether the system was going to work to launch the boat, and there were some glitches along the way, obviously, but in the end, it's fine, it's beautiful, everything worked out.
After the battle. The construction site, a scene of so much activity, so much uncertainty, now lies deserted. For the treasure ship, the next stop is Singapore.